What up, friends? It's not that bad. And today we're going to be reviewing James Blake and Lil Yachty's collab album, Bad Cameo. This is the first collaborative project by British singer-songwriter and producer James Blake alongside American rapper Lil Yachty. While James Blake hasn't collabed with Lil Yachty before specifically, he has been starting to incorporate more rappers into his discography, starting with 2019's Assume Form. The switch up, to me at least, was pretty welcome, I have to say, injecting something fresh into his tried and true formula. Lil Yachty has also been shaking things up in his career, with 2023's record Let's Start Here being a kind of psychedelic rock record, also infused with his typical psychedelic trap stuff sometimes. It was pretty refreshing for him too, I have to say. That auto-tuned crooning that he usually does, combined with a psychedelic rock edge, worked out surprisingly well. It was a pretty great record. This album, on the other hand, though, it's a bit of a mixed bag. It's not bad on the whole, and honestly, it does have a fairly pleasant vibe, but it doesn't really feel like a natural and organic mesh of James Blake and Lil Yachty sounds. In all honesty, it kind of just sounds like a James Blake record with Lil Yachty featuring on every song. So, while it's not necessarily bad, it also just doesn't really have that sort of unique perspective that I was hoping for when I heard that these two artists were going to make an album together. Save the Savior is a pretty decent start for the project, I have to say, with this somber yet regal sort of loop of piano chords going off in the background as Yachty comes in with his typical auto-tune crooning. The vocals do a pretty good job at echoing around the space, creating a pretty dreamlike atmosphere for the song. However, we do still get a bit of Yachty's humorous side in the lyrics as he says, "I told my agent I want to be treated just like a slut, pay me directly after." Though James and Yachty's vocals don't really mesh, but they do actually have a pretty interesting contrast to them, especially with Lil Yachty's more direct vocals and James Blake's more explosive and ethereal ones popping in and out here and there. The pairing of the delivery is at least pretty compelling, again, even if they don't always blend all that well. The synth flourishes and the booming yet muffled beats, I think, do a pretty good job at showcasing something building. Maybe it's, James and Yachty's, creative experience kind of starting to grow and grow, or whatever, but it does a good job at building anticipation, I feel. In Grey is a pretty pleasant song as well, however I think it's a bit too sparse until we get to that last leg. Lil Yachty actually does show more of an introspective side here in the lyrics too, expressing, "They say I love too deeply right away, but if I try, I can't subside again." I think the track does a pretty good job at expressing the haze that you can find yourself in while you're looking for a partner or someone that can kind of mesh with you and kind of relate to you, but also feels different enough to where you can kind of, grow together. It has that vibe of sifting through options to find someone who kind of provides something that you can't, and vice versa. However, like I said, I feel like it's a bit too sparse and samey up until we get to the final act of the track. When it does pick up, though, it picks up. That beat comes in hard, and the flourishes of guitar and synth, they create a really layered experience. I honestly wish that the entire song had the flow of this second half, to be honest. Midnights is also pretty chilling, with the simple synths and vocals wistfully flowing around like wind. James's chorus especially is really melodic, injecting some positivity into this fairly cold instrumental as he encourages this relationship to hold on. It's like this voice from the darkness telling the relationship to try and mend itself. The bridge sees that synth really pick up and create this alarm sound like it's just calling someone home, and James's vocals on this part are just fantastic. Like, James and Yachty are pining on this one, man. The next song, Woo, is a bit more upbeat, at least in comparison to the rest of the record. The piano sample is very dramatic, and Yachty's flow is pretty smooth, too. The beat itself is fairly simple, though. I would have preferred some deeper sounding drums to properly balance out the pretty expressive string segments on this track. That distant piano that's on this one also could have used a beat that's a bit more fleshed out or fulfilling. It's still a nice change of pace for the record, however, it could have done a bit more in expressing and backing up the lovesick angle of the lyrics, especially in Lil Yachty's parts. The title track, Bad Cameo, is unfortunately the worst song on the project, and probably one of the only moments that I can say I really just did not like. This is when I feel that James and Yachty are kind of stretching an instrumental thin, and the wobbly tone that Yachty has on his vocals right here just sounds kind of awkward. The instrumental is largely just a very skeletal curtain of synths and vocals, far too sparse for a track of this length. Lil Yachty's auto-tune style vocals do much better over very lush sounding production, I find, because in isolation I don't think Lil Yachty's vocals often have the power to stand on their own. He does great when he's able to synergize with something more organic sounding. However, because this track is so skeletal and so sparse, I feel like the combination here just does not work very well. Missing Man gets a bit quirky with it, having a fairly playful synth section that is contrasted by Lil Yachty's vibrato and very expressive strings. It's pretty elegant overall, and also pretty reserved. I think this matches the lyrics basically talking about someone kind of going back into their shell as the pressures of life are just kind of beating them down. It's kind of an ode to the recluse in a way, and the metallic sample that comes in as we approach the end has this harsher tone that really showcases, I think, these pressures catching up to them. It's also kind of a rare catchy moment on the project too, as the vocal melodies on this one feel much more up in front and in the center of attention compared to the other songs on the project. Twice is another pretty compelling one, having a vibrant and off-kilter backdrop of piano and vocal samples. It almost sounds like a bit of a ray of hope in this project, as Yachty says, "I moved my feet, marched to the drum of my own beat. Yeah, I look in the mirror and I do not see defeat." The collage of sounds that we got going on here have a kind of wistful glitchiness to them, like it's a brief reprieve from sadness or something like that. In a way, it almost feels like a sudden window of calm, I guess. James's moments are also pretty powerful as well, kind of showcasing them trying to break through this sadness, this haze that they're feeling as he exclaims, "Nobody knows our situation." It's just a real melodic treat overall. Like, this is definitely one of the best songs on the project. Transport Me has a sort of late night foggy groove to it that's pretty immersive, but also kind of banal. Lil Yachty's portion, as we get more spacey synths and punchy drums, is pretty cool, but the rest of the instrumental just doesn't really mesh with it all that well. I think the structure and progression of this track is a bit skewed, as we get Lil Yachty's like straight up fucking rapping portion, which goes kinda hard, meshed with James Blake as usual on here, and I just don't feel like that's very natural sounding. Like, it's pretty interesting when we get to Yachty's part, but then when we get back to James Blake's parts, it's like, okay, it's kind of underwhelming in comparison. The song actually has this sort of like sci-fi electro sound as we get to the sort of end and the outro of the track, which is honestly pretty cool, but it really doesn't feel like we properly built up the way to get there. Runaway for the Rabbit is okay. It's another fairly simple one like the title track, but this one at least has a few more elements that make it a bit more compelling. James's vocals especially are very ethereal and somber, and I think the addition of the female vocals on the post-chorus and the final verse also add a bit of texture. However, the song is kind of boring still. Red Carpet is an alright end to the project, largely feeling like an epilogue of sorts that kind of interconnects the themes of belonging, love, and self-reflection that we kind of traversed throughout its runtime. Yachty's line, "All of my mistakes were made under a microscope, I can't learn in peace, I feel like I'm just like them, they scold me for what I can't see," sums this up pretty well, I think. The instrumental has this sort of like fuzzy lullaby angle going for it that at least does make it pretty fitting as an end to the project, but again, like a lot of the songs on here, it really just doesn't feel like a proper mesh of the sounds that James and Yachty were exploring. It feels a bit standard, not like what I would have expected from a collab between James Blake and Lil Yachty. You know, it's pleasant, but that's kind of all it is. The album overall, like I said, was okay. Like I mentioned previously, it really just feels like a James Blake album with Yachty featuring on every track. Both deliver some fairly nice performances, but nothing on here really felt like something that only these two guys can do together. The instrumentals were nice and created a fairly pleasant and dreamy vibe, however I wish we got flashes and flourishes of the sort of psychedelic and prog rock sound that Lil Yachty was experimenting on his previous record. I feel like that would have really helped break up the pace a little bit, kind of gave us a little more variety in the track listing too. This is also definitely one of those albums that shoots for a vibe that's kind of hard to come back to often. It works, but it's also too one note to properly think like, oh, I really need to revisit this. It's one of those albums that just does not really feel like an unprecedented collab between two artists like James Blake and Lil Yachty. It's pretty pleasant as like, a background listen or something to put on when you're in that right mood. But again, that's kind of all it is. I guess in short, it's a pleasant album to listen to passively. Because of all of this, I am feeling a light 6. on this collab album by James Blake and Lil Yachty. Of course, we do still have to talk about album covers on the show, and as stereotypical, I guess, as this cover is, it goes pretty hard. I'm not gonna lie. The color combinations on this thing, I think, are really slick. It definitely has that sort of like cool, chill out vibe to it, especially with all the reflections. It seems like they kind of up the contrast on the colors a little bit too. I love this, again, as stereotypical as it is, the posh British man meeting the American rapper as he sips his tea and he sips his lean. But again, the composition, I think, is pretty sweet. I think it's really slick looking. I think the color scheme is great. It just really works, I feel. But of course, those are just my thoughts on this collab album by James Blake and Lil Yachty. What did you guys think? Do you think this was pretty much exactly the vibe that you were craving for by them? You think this is exactly what this sound should have been when they collabed? Or were you kind of hoping for something a bit more experimental, maybe a proper blend of the sounds that they've been exploring? Let me know. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, and that won't be a bad thing to me. And until the next one, farewell.